it took us some time to demonstrate that, hey, we're a little bit different. We're just regular guys, and we're trying to deliver a successful outcome to your clients. And I think once we did that a few times, and so I think our first 4 or 5 hospital acquisitions were through working with 4 or 5 different brokers. And once we did a transaction with them, and they could see that we were going to do what we said we were going to do, and when we said we were going to do it, I think that put them at ease in terms of working with us going forward, and I think opened up the doors to do more transactions with them and their clients. So I think that's a big source. Certainly was in the beginning, but you got to remember, we were just starting off, and buying our first hospital in cities that were attractive to us, that we thought that eventually we would want to be in. Houston was one of those, and we had a great opportunity that came to us through a broker to meet Dr. Vance Murphy at Clear Lake City Veterinary Clinic. And it was everything that we thought we were going to look for in a hospital. And we struck up a great relationship with Dr. Murphy and his wife Rosalie. It ended up being a very successful transaction, I think, for the Murphys. And Clear Lake City Veterinary Clinic has been an awesome hospital for us. So it couldn't have been a more perfect first hospital. And quite frankly, it's because of that we ended up putting our home office in Houston, and really building our team there.
For a while in Virginia, we were the only veterinary clinic at Independent Hill. And how did you decide to, because everything was centered initially in Texas, right, in Houston and Dallas, and then we were the outlier for a little while, but now
Sure.
there's a fair number on the East Coast. But how did you decide to kind of branch out towards the East Coast?
Yeah, so one of those 8 or 10 markets that we had identified in the beginning was this kind of Washington, D.C. metro market. And we, I'd say we kept a concentration in Houston and Dallas because that's where our first 2 acquisitions were. And the funny thing about making an acquisition in a city, once you start, then whereas brokers may have led us to the first acquisition, if we do a good job, then we're going to start to build a positive reputation in those markets, and that tends to lead to new hospitals in those markets. So, there's no surprise that we've had a lot more hospitals join PetWell in Houston and Dallas because, you get two becomes 3, and then 3 becomes 5, and those 5 are, again, if we do a good job, we've got then 5 sellers who have had positive outcomes that are going to tell their friends. We're going to have doctors that work on our teams in those hospitals that are spreading the word. And I think that's been a big driver of growth in those markets. So while we were concentrated there, we still kept our eyes on, and do to this day, keep our eyes on, those 10 or so markets that eventually we'd like to have a presence in. And it just so happened that we had an opportunity to partner with Dr. Connell and Dr. Moore with Independent Hill, and that was our first outside of Texas. We're thrilled that now, fast forward a few years later, we have 4 locations in that kind of greater Washington, D.C., Mid-Atlantic market, and with more on the way. So, I think that's a market that we're really keen to continue to grow into.
We're restructuring like our support network so that now we have a chief medical officer and then we have clinical directors that then support the medical directors. What was was there a specific clinic number that you got to that you then decided now we have to restructure? Or was it always kind of the intent when you had enough clinics that we would need a greater support structure? How did that kind of come about?
Yeah, so, I think real life doesn't always follow a model. So we, as much as we'd like to be able to predict exactly when we're going to acquire hospitals and exactly where those hospitals are going to be, and at what point we're going to need X resource or Y resource, some of it, just happens, and we are, constantly planning and replanning and replanning and replanning and replanning. So I wouldn't say that there was a hospital number, but last year, we recognized that a lot of our communication, across all of our hospitals was not at the level that we wanted it to be. And, we've all played the game of telephone. We've, done communication team builds that, mixed up or even missed. And the bigger we get, the more prevalent, that kind of miscommunication can be. And I can't tell you how many times, when I hear, corporate told me XYZ, it really breaks my heart to hear that, because there is no corporate. I mean, I think we've got a group of people who are all trying to do a really good job and support our hospitals at the highest level. And a lot of times when we hear corporate told me X, it's just a message that's not accurate, and it's certainly not the intention of whoever they might have heard that message from. We are constantly focused on making sure we have the right number of resources in the right places to make communication effective throughout our company. And that's really, I think, the key to our being able to succeed as we grow and scale. We have to be able to effectively communicate, throughout. And our doctors and practice managers and CSRs and technicians should be in the loop and kind of all be on the same page. I think if you look at what makes a hospital successful, secret sauce might just be having everybody inside the hospital on the same page. And that's no different when you think about PetWell as a company. If we're on the same page as a group of 35 hospitals and growing, we're going to be a pretty powerful group. The realignment this last year was just recognizing that we were falling a little bit behind there, and really needed to focus on our on our communication. We've overinvested at this point to sort of get out in front of future growth, because it's that important to us.
And how did you come to the idea of partnering with AHA? Like, were you aware of what AHA was before you bought your first practice, or did you just acquire practices that were AHA accredited and want to delve in deeper?
Yeah, we learned about AHA in kind of our pre-launch research year. Coming from higher education previously, I was very aware of accreditation. Higher education is almost entirely accredited. Accreditation is required to access, for your students to be able to access Title IV and federal student loans and Pell Grants and all those things. So it becomes almost a requirement if you want to have students come to your school to be accredited. There are also state licensing requirements that kind of push colleges to become accredited. So that's where I came from, and really, I think have a high value for accreditation. In my mind, it is a voluntary process of pushing yourself to be held accountable for standards that you think are important. All those things are nuanced, but really, really critical, I think. If I can take a step back, if it were not voluntary, then people would have a different view of it. It would be being forced to do something that you may or may not agree with. That's not what accreditation is meant to be. Accreditation is meant to be there for institutions or leaders to say, you know what, I want to be held accountable for executing on procedures, the processes, kind of all of the best practices that I identify for my hospital. I want to be held accountable for executing on those. If I'm the one holding myself accountable, then it's just going to be too easy for that to slip. And so accreditation is a great tool for saying, all right, where's the industry going? How do we want to adapt? And then volunteering to be held accountable to those standards that you're adopting in your hospital. That's where I think the value of accreditation is generally. And then when we looked at the veterinary profession, we felt like, gosh, I mean, human healthcare, over 80% of hospitals are accredited. In the veterinary profession, 15% or less are accredited. We feel like that presents a great opportunity if we can promote accreditation. AHA is a great organization. They've been an industry leader for a long time, since the 1930s, which in the veterinary world is forever. If we can help them grow their presence, then we feel like that's only going to be a benefit for the profession and ultimately for pets and their families.
It's always just been individual hospitals can become accredited. And you helped AHA kind of create the standards for parent company accreditation. And how did that, did you approach them? Did they approach you? Because I know it was multiple companies that were involved in that kind of standards approach, correct? It wasn't just PetWell and AHA.
Correct. So it all started really with a conversation over lunch with Mike and Mitch and Jan over at AHA. We just started talking about the changing landscape in the veterinary profession, which is rapidly consolidating. And when we started, there were, I don't know, maybe 10 quote unquote corporate groups out there operating hospitals. Today, there might be 40 or more. And new ones added every year. And so, looking at that, it's kind of like, who are all these groups and how are we as a profession, how are we going to manage the quality of those groups? And how do we signal to a veterinarian practice owner kind of who's who and, what quality looks like from a corporate, quote unquote, corporate support standpoint. So that conversation led to, well, let's explore it, and AHA put together a working group to develop those standards with them, invited a few other representatives into the group, and over a multi-month process, we came up with some standards to present to the AHA board. They went through their internal process of reviewing those standards and proposing changes, and kind of end to end, it took a little over a year to get those standards adopted and approved. Then PetWell Partners became the first to become AHA accredited at the network level, which is something we're really, really proud of.
Part of the